The Gospel of John, Session 9. In this session, we're going to be looking at John 16:4b to 18:32. First, John 16:4b through 11. Jesus makes it clear to the disciples that his going away is not a cause of sadness, but ironically a cause of joy. The reason why it's a cause of joy is that Jesus is going to the Father, and this will make it possible for the Spirit to come. It's not that the Spirit simply follows the coming of the Son, but rather the Son's coming makes the Spirit's coming possible. This is Jesus' fourth statement about the Spirit in 16:7. Note the connection between the Son's departure and the Spirit's coming. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. Jesus has spoken about his relationship to the Spirit before. In 15:26, the Son sends the Spirit from the Father. In 14:25, the Spirit is sent by the Father in the Son's name. In 16:7, the Son sends the Spirit. We must think of the ministry of the Son and the ministry of the Spirit as being organically related to one another. The language of 16:8 presupposes a trial in which the world is proven guilty, even though it thinks of itself as having proven Jesus guilty. The Spirit will bear witness against the world, and in doing so, it will confirm the faith of the disciples. The world will be proven wrong on three counts: on sin, on righteousness, and on judgment. The essence of sin is the rejection of the divine word as untrue. Sin is a fundamental resistance to God and the truth that he reveals. The Spirit will show that the world is in rebellion against God and that this rebellion is based on falsehood. The world will also be proven wrong about righteousness. For the world, Jesus' crucifixion shows that he's been rejected by God as unrighteous. But the Spirit will bear witness to the fact that Jesus has gone to the Father, and so is the righteous one. The witness of the Spirit will counter the assumptions of the world. The Spirit will also prove the world to be wrong about judgment. Jesus' death on the cross will be seen as a defeat in the eyes of his adversaries, over which they will rejoice. But the Spirit will bear witness that it is the ruler of this world who's been condemned. Jesus' death will be shown to have broken the power of the devil, as we saw in 12:31. John 16:12 to 15. This is the fifth promise about the Spirit. Jesus has many things to tell the disciples, but they're not ready to hear them. What will be communicated later by the Spirit must be communicated by the Spirit because it will not simply be a matter of applying human intelligence to various issues. Now the Spirit is designated as the Spirit of truth because he will guide the disciples into all the truth. The Spirit will lead the disciples into the truth which has been revealed already in Jesus. Through the Spirit, the meaning of what Jesus has revealed will be imparted to the disciples and will saturate their hearts and minds. This truth cannot be appropriated in a merely mechanical way. The Spirit will glorify the Son, and the Spirit will disclose the identity of the Son in his relationship to the Father. The Son is glorified by being shown to share equality in the glory of the Father. The relationship between the Father and the Son is such that they share completely in one another. The Father gives all that he has to the Son, and the Son pours himself completely out for the Father. Through the Spirit, this communion is revealed to us, and we then are allowed to share in it. The one mission of God is carried out both by the Son and the Spirit. But the truth of the Son can only be received through the ministry of the Spirit. John 16:16 to 24. In 16:16, Jesus states a paradoxical truth. In a little while, the disciples will not be able to see him, but also in a little while, they will be able to see him. Jesus is speaking about his death and resurrection. The disciples must think about their experience of what is about to occur in the light of this promise. The disciples appear to be thoroughly confused. Jesus briefly describes what they will experience. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, and the world will rejoice. You'll be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. To illustrate this point, Jesus uses the example of a woman in childbirth in 16:21. When her hour has come, a woman in childbirth is in great pains, but after the birth of her child, there's the joy of giving new life, which helps her to see that the pain was worth it. Note Romans 8:22, where Paul uses the same metaphor. Likewise, the disciples will experience great sorrow at Jesus' death. But this sorrow will give way to joy when the birth, that is Jesus' resurrection, comes. Note the emphasis in 16:22. Jesus' resurrection will be such that their sorrow will be replaced by joy, and no one will take your joy from you, Jesus says. This enduring joy is grounded in the resurrection. During the time of the resurrection, the disciples will not question Jesus about anything, as they have just questioned him repeatedly. The reason for this has been indicated in 16:13. The time of the resurrection will be the time of communion between Jesus and his disciples, a communion that will be made possible by the Spirit. This communion will be manifested in the way in which they pray. They will pray in communion with Jesus and will thus pray in accordance with God's will. By praying in communion with Jesus, what they ask will be given to them. It's important to see here that prayer is not simply a matter of asking God for things, but a matter of drawing nearer to God and becoming more and more open to him. This openness to God results in a joy that is full, complete in 16:24. John 16:25-33. While Jesus has spoken to the disciples in figures of speech, the time is coming when he will speak to them plainly about the Father. The difference between now and then is the coming of the Spirit. While they cannot understand all this now, the disciples will have a new relationship to Jesus, one of intimate communion. This communion will be based on love. Note that in 16:27, love and faith are essentially the same thing. The love of the disciples for Jesus will be expressed in their faith that he is from the Father. Having loved the Son, they also will have loved the Father. In the Son, they receive the love of the Father. Once again, Jesus' departure from this world is not to be seen as a bad thing, as Jesus is not somehow abandoning the disciples, as he says in 16:28. In 16:29-30, it becomes clear that the disciples misunderstand Jesus again. At this point, true understanding is impossible, for Jesus has not yet been glorified and the Spirit has not yet been given. Their faith is still incomplete, and it must be at this point. In fact, the approach of this hour will result in their being scattered, and they will leave Jesus alone. In light of all this, Jesus offers a consolation. While the disciples will leave him alone, Jesus actually never will be alone because the Father and he will always be together. The success of Jesus' mission is not dependent upon the unwavering faith of the disciples. The peace which the disciples are to have is not a product of their own intelligence or steadfastness, and it's certainly not a product of their never experiencing difficulty. Jesus makes it clear that the peace that they are to have comes from their relationship with the Father. Note the contrast. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. The hour which is approaching is the victory of Jesus, not the victory of his disciples. John 17:1-8. 17:1-26 is an extended prayer offered by Jesus on behalf of the disciples and also the church, which is to come. For this reason, it is sometimes called the high priestly prayer. It's analogous to the prayer that the high priest would have offered on behalf of Israel on the Day of Atonement when he went into the Holy of Holies. This prayer emphasizes the intimacy of the Father and the Son. Jesus' hour has now come, and it is to be an hour in which God will be glorified. While Jesus' death may appear to be an hour of shame and defeat and rejection, it will be, in fact, the hour in which the Father will glorify the Son by raising him from the dead, and which the Son will glorify the Father by revealing his love. The cross involves the Father surrendering his Son and the Son surrendering himself. The Son has been given authority over everyone, and now he asks that the Father give eternal life to all who believe in him. As crucified, risen, and ascended, the Son becomes the source of eternal life, life with a capital L. Eternal life is knowing the Son, for in knowing the Son, one comes to a knowledge of the Father, or better, one enters into communion with the Father. Note that the Son is not receiving a glory which he hasn't always possessed. His glorification by the Father reveals something about him that has always been true. In the presence of the Father, the Son will possess the glory, the divine radiance that he had before the world existed, 17:5. Jesus has fulfilled this mission of revealing the name of the Father. Note the reciprocity between the Father and the Son. Those who have come to Jesus belong to the Father, who has given them to the Son. The Son has imparted the Father's words to them, and they have come to know the truth about God. This truth cannot be simply stated. It has many implications. The truth about God is that he has sent the Son into the world to redeem the world. And that reveals both that he is a creator and a loving Father. John 17:9-19. Jesus prays for the disciples as they are about to be sent out into the world. Jesus emphasizes the communion between the Father, the Son, and the disciples. The Father has given the disciples to the Son, but this action is qualified by the fact that all that the Son possesses belongs to the Father, and all the Father possesses belongs to the Son. The Son is glorified in the disciples. Note one of the consequences of this communion. The Father is glorified in the Son. The Father glorifies the Son, and the Son is glorified in the disciples and their witness. The Son is going to the Father, but the disciples will remain in the world, and so Jesus prays for their protection and their unity. The unity of the disciples will be a sign of their communion with the Father and the Son. The communion of Father and Son and disciples results in the joy of the Son being fulfilled in the disciples. It should be noted that this is not simply a human joy, but rather it is the joy of the Son given to the disciples. This joy is supernatural in nature. Because the disciples have received Jesus' word, they are not the possessors of that word, but rather they've been set apart, just as the Son himself has been set apart to minister in the world. Jesus prays for the protection for disciples, particularly for protection from the evil one in 17:15. He does not, however, pray that they will be removed from the world because they're being sent into the world. And this is because that's where their mission unfolds. The disciples can only carry out their mission in communion with God, and this means that while they will be in the world, they will not be of it. 17:17-19 is of great significance. Jesus asked the Father to consecrate the disciples. The Greek verb that's used here is the same verb that's used in the Greek translation of Exodus 29:1. Where consecrate refers to the ordination of the sons of Aaron to the priesthood. Jesus has already spoken of himself as being consecrated and sent into the world back in 10:36. The disciples are to be ordained in the truth, which is Jesus himself. However, before the disciples can begin their mission, their ministry, their priesthood, Jesus must consecrate himself as the sacrifice which seals the new covenant. Jesus' sacrifice is the source of the consecration and mission that the disciples will receive. John 17, 20-26. Participation in the communion of God's triune life is now extended to future disciples. 17:20 highlights the fruit of the apostolic ministry. There will, despite opposition of the world, be future generations of disciples. Jesus prays that these disciples will be unified because of their common sharing in the communion of the life of God. Just as the Father and the Son are in one another, future disciples will be in the life of God. The participation of human beings in the divine communion is salvation. The unity of the disciples will be a witness to their being sent from the Son. And the glory that the Father has given to the Son will give to the disciples. The community of the disciples has a destination. They will see the Son's glory, a glory given by the Father to the Son before the foundation of the world, 1724. Jesus' final prayer for the disciples is that the love with which the Father has loved him will be in them as well. Father, Son, Spirit, and Church will form a communion of love, and this will constitute the very essence of the church and will be the source of the church's witness until the end of time. John 18, 1-14. The scene now shifts from the place where Jesus and the disciples kept the Passover to a garden across the Kidron Valley in 18:1. This valley most likely was on the Mount of Olives and is known as the Garden of Gethsemane. When we last saw Judas, he had gone out into the night in 13:30. That is the darkness of sin. Now he reappears with soldiers and officers sent from the chief priests and the scribes and Pharisees to arrest Jesus. It's significant that this arresting force consists of both Gentiles, that is Roman soldiers, and Jews, officers from the chief priests. This group represents the whole of sinful humankind. Jesus has already said that the ruler of this world is his chief opponent. So we may take Judas and his band of soldiers and officers as representing him. Appropriately, they act at night. John's account emphasizes that Jesus is in full control of all that happens. Note that when Jesus identifies himself in 18:5, I am he, the arresting party behaves as if it had experienced a vision of God, and that is, they all fall to the ground. Jesus identifies himself in this way a second time and then acts with authority. He allows himself to be arrested, and he commands that the disciples be let go. Peter decides that Jesus needs to be protected, and so responds in the way that the chief priests have anticipated. They sent an armed force because they expected armed resistance, and now Peter responds according to that expectation. He pulls out his sword and cuts off an ear of the high priest. Attempts to protect Jesus reveal a merely human understanding of his mission. Jesus' response to Peter in 18:11 makes this clear. The language of drinking the cup is the Old Testament way of fulfilling God's will. Note Psalm 16:5. Jesus has come to this hour by his own choice and out of love for the Father. He's in control. In 18:12-14, the dual opposition of the arresting party is mentioned again. There are both soldiers, officers of the Jews, and Roman soldiers. Jesus is arrested because he allows himself to be arrested. He's taken first to Annas, the former high priest and a person of influence, and then to Caiaphas, the current high priest. Caiaphas makes that unconsciously prophetic remark about one man dying for the whole nation. John 18:15-27. John has arranged this narrative so that Jesus' appearance before Annas is placed between two scenes in which Peter denies Jesus. Both Peter and Jesus are both on trial, but Peter's trial and frailty are fully exposed. Does another disciple in 18:15 refer to the beloved disciple that we've already met? If so, this disciple may have been had aristocratic priestly connections because he's allowed to come into the high priest's house and the courtyard. He's able then to get Peter admitted as well in 1816. The servant girl, watching the door, questions Peter, "Are you also one of that man's disciples?" Peter's response is emphatic, "I am not." As he stands there among Jesus' enemies, he denies having any contact with Jesus at all. In 18:19 through 24, Jesus appears before Annas, and when questioned, Jesus implies that he has spoken openly and taught in the synagogues and the temple. Jesus does not have a secret teaching that's been taught only to a few. Jesus tells Annas that he can easily ask anyone who has heard him teaching about what he's asking about. Note that only by mentioning Annas here and not reporting what Annas actually says, John actually allows the spotlight to remain on Jesus and not on Annas. This scene underlines the fact that the outcome of this trial has been predetermined. Having listened in on the questioning of Jesus, we will return to the questioning of Peter. He's already been questioned by a servant girl, and now those standing around him start to question him. "Aren't you one of his disciples too?" Is Peter a disciple of Jesus? He's questioned a third time by a relative of the man whose ear he cut off in the Garden of Gethsemane. Note that this question is even more specific. "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Peter has now denied being a disciple of Jesus 3 times. Is he really a disciple? We'll find out. John 18:28 to 32. This is the first scene of Jesus' trial. Jesus is now taken before Pilate. In John's narrative, it's clear that it's not Jesus who's on trial, but Pilate and the Jews in 1831. Note that John tells us nothing about Jesus' appearance before Caiaphas, only that they, that is the Jews, bring him from Caiaphas' house to the Praetorium, Pilate's Jerusalem headquarters. While the Jews are happy to hand Jesus over to Pilate for execution, they refuse to enter the Praetorium, since doing so would render them unclean, because if you go into a Gentile's house, that makes you unclean. And they don't want to be defiled because the Passover is coming up. Note that they have no reservations about sending an innocent man to his death. Pilate comes out of the Praetorium to speak to them. And following procedure, Pilate asks them about the accusations being made. Significantly, they offer no specific accusations. They say, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate cannot conduct a trial with no accusations being made. And so he tells the Jews to take Jesus and judge him by your own law, 1831. At this point, Pilate sees only a kind of intra-Jewish dispute in which he has no interest at all. The Jews now suggest that the crime involved is a capital crime and that administering such a punishment is beyond their authority. In 1832, John makes it clear that Jesus' death on the cross has already been hinted at. Once again, John makes it clear that Jesus is not a victim. He's in control.